investigation team when they ran the special counsel. And in his book, which I've just read, he talks at great length about how we were so close and we just couldn't get there. You had the full resources of the national security establishment at your disposal. Trust me, if something was there, like you had financial information, everyone's text messages, everyone's phone calls. When you sign a FISA warrant, and this is still something that I see people kind of misunderstanding, which is, I understand that people don't usually sign FISA warrants on a regular basis in their day-to-day business, but a FISA warrant is far more than just communications surveillance. A FISA warrant authorizes all forms of human intelligence collection, communications collection, as well as physical collection. I mean, they can go into your room, go into your house, go into your hotel, go unlock your laptop, all of it. They can literally do all of it. And as you're working, you can. It's called looking over your shoulder. So they don't need to decrypt anything, because if they've got your device, then they can just look at what you're doing on your screen, right? And so when you're using those tools, and as David just spoke so eloquently, you're only supposed to use them for a hardened terrorist or an actual Russian operative that's working in the United States. And usually, in the counterintelligence world, so that's what this kind of started out as a counterintelligence investigation, that it's supposed to be that you have some kind of derogatory information that creates what's called a sort of an inciting moment, right? What was your probable cause, right? Probable cause in the legal sense. So the predicate is another word that you would hear. And so once you start from that perspective, you then need to find steps taken in furtherance of this. You need operational acts. You need, typically what you look at in counterintelligence is the theft of classified information, right? That's sort of the classic one. So if any of you guys have ever worked in the military, DoD, or any classified settings, I'm sure you've heard of one, or you know a guy or someone who mishandled or was taking documents out and was given to someone they shouldn't have, or something. That's it, right? That's your operational act. Well, in the entire Trump campaign, George, what happened to Carter, what happened to General Flynn, there's no operational acts. Yes, there's conversations, sure, lots of conversations, but even going beyond that basis, if you understand this, that if there are no operational acts taken in furtherance of Russian interests, then you're just violating people's civil liberties at that point. You're just violating civil liberties.
So speaking of that, there were 3 conversations, or maybe 4 or 5 actually, that you had that were first recorded by the FBI. One was Stefan Halper, 2? 1?
Probably, well, I guess you could consider 3 were recorded, just
okay.
in that 1 trip alone.
So 3 recorded conversations with Stefan Halper. Recorded conversations with a friend of his who they bribed basically to become a mole on you, correct? Or a former friend?
I can't even any of these people they threw at me from X country or Y X friend of mine from college that I hadn't seen in 10 years.
Yeah.
Who they ended up trying to get to wear a wire to make me say something in a half joking way that I never did. But no, about Stefan Halper, because this is a very timely person, because Senator Ron Johnson, who's an incredible patriot, and I think he's really taken on a mantle of leadership over in Wisconsin, he has subpoenaed this person. We've known about Stefan Halper since Chuck Ross over at the Daily Caller wrote this incredible piece on him, I think in late 2018, about me having suspicions about what was going on in London. This is 2018, let alone what's going on right now with the new info we have. And the reason Stefan Halper is so important is because he has been outed as an informant, but he was meeting not only with me, but with General Flynn,
Carter Page,
and others,
Sam
Clovis, and he tried to ingratiate himself within the transition team and actually even get a job as an ambassador in the Trump administration. So this guy was not only a mole for whichever agency he was working for, which I highly believe that it wasn't simply the FBI. I think he was more connected to MI6 and the CIA, considering that he was a professor at Cambridge, where his cover was that all these meetings that were taking place were in London, between myself, Stefan Halper, General Flynn, Stefan Halper, and they tried to lure, I think, Carter Page to London as well. If this was simply an FBI person, you go, you get him wired up, he meets you in Washington, D.C. or wherever you are, he gets something out of you or he doesn't, and that's it. You don't need to create this situation where you're luring Americans abroad to wiretap them. So, going back to Senator Johnson and him subpoenaing this person, we're finally going to understand who his true handler was, how early on he was tasked to go after people associated to Donald Trump, because obviously this started way before July 2016, when the FBI says it did spontaneously, and whether or not he was involved with other intelligence agencies and not just the FBI. Because that's where the real scandal is. I mean, and Jack, who's lived and breathed this, could probably speak about the legalities surrounding the CIA collecting intelligence on Americans versus the FBI or other foreign governments doing it. So I'm really expecting to learn a lot more about this person, and it's probably going to uncover a lot about the other intelligence agencies that were involved in Spygate, not simply the FBI. That's why I think this person's deposition is so important coming up this week.
Yeah, Stefan Halper was the person who basically planted the rumor that General Flynn was having an affair with a Russian student from Cambridge named Svetlana Lakova. And they used that as sort of a way that he's compromised and he can be bribed. It was completely false. Svetlana's come out and spoken about it. David, is there negative Nelly over there? Just kidding. So watching this from your perspective, given the work that you've done and the study that you've done, how is this incident in the United States parallel in any way to any sort of other coups we've seen overseas, or sort of political, sort of political movements being used to cause complete discourse in a country and all that stuff?
Sure. I mean, the thing that sticks out to me more than anything is the use of the media and the use of the national security apparatus, really, let's say the intelligence world, together with the media seamlessly. You know, we have reporters that we call, Fusion Natasha Bertrand, Fusion Ken Delanian, these people who, just, it's
Fusion Issakoff.
Fusion Issakoff, right. So their sources are telling them exactly what to say, and they're putting it out, and it's complete spin. And our friend Lee Smith made a great point when he said that, this is how the Arab press used to work, or this is how third world press really works, which is you pick up the newspaper not to find out what's happening, but to find out, you have to kind of read between the lines and say, okay, this particular intelligence service, or this particular oligarch wants me to believe this, as opposed to what is it that's happening on a factual basis. So I think there's that, and that's tremendously negative. The upside is, it's teaching a lot of us in this room, and let's say a big chunk of the country, how to do that.
Yep.
So we can pick up these articles and we can say, and we can read and we can say, a source close to X says, with a congressional quote and a Senate aide or whatever, it could be the same person.
As the source.
As a source.
Yep.
Or two people. And now we kind of maybe are hip enough to be able to read some of that. And I mean, this is my business. This is what I used to do. And it's really great to see, so many of you being able to pick up these things and say, you know what, this is fake. And I think one of the great things about President Trump is he has the ability to be really pithy and just exactly, put into words concepts that, would take me 25 minutes to explain, which is fake news. It is fake news. It's absolutely fake news. The idea that we used to have you know, from old movies of a reporter, you know, walking the beat, you know, shoe leather reporter in the neighborhood, you know, ear to the ground, trying to figure out what's happening, and hey, I hear a rumor from a bookie that says blah, blah, blah. That era is gone. When you read an article in the New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, wherever, that article is, I mean, it's almost rare that that article is actually written by the journalist. It's here you go, someone like Fusion GPS, or someone like me says, here you go, I put together the oppo file, this is the thing, this is the, just run it. Maybe they'll make a few changes, maybe they'll write it up, this is how it's done. And the more Americans understand that and can look at it with a critical eye, I think the better we are, just in terms of the health of our republic, or what's left of it, the health of, you know, just for our own awareness.
Thanks, that's awesome. So Jack, given the rules in the audience, how is journalism supposed to work? How does OANN do their journalism?
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, we just call up Vladimir Putin every
Whatever Russia today is.
he just tells us, quite simply, you know, we work with a variety of sources, both named and unnamed, in Washington, D.C. and throughout the country. We do strive very hard to be on top of that game in terms of using sources who are willing to go on the record, but every so often it does happen that in order to protect someone's identity, that you do have to use someone who's on background or is off the record. And I know that due to the paradigm that David was speaking about, that those sort of anonymous source stories kind of have a bad rap, and that's because people have clearly abused this quite greatly in the United States. However, a lot of the times that when you have a source who wants to go anonymous, right? You as here's the way it's supposed to work. Here's the way it's supposed to work, and this is the way at least we try to do it. I work with a great investigative reporter named Richard Pollack. He's taught me so much. If you guys know Richard, I think some people do. Just wonderful guy. Richard, got your plug in. And so when you're protecting someone's identity, it's because the story could cause harm to the source, right? But if you look at the way that the New York Times or CNN or the Washington Post are using protected sources, those stories are creating damage to their political opponents, right? Or damage to senators or perhaps activists or candidates that they don't like, or in many cases the President of the United States. And so it really isn't any detriment to them to be able to speak out. It's because you're supposed to be exposing wrongdoing, right? And so that's the reason that maybe someone would be anonymous. And so just really basic example that I could give of this was that I think everyone could see, and it's very quickly, and it's not related to Spygate at all, but it's related to when the President of the United States very recently was diagnosed with COVID-19, right? You guys remember that? He's doing well, thank God he's doing well, of course. And the media first started saying, when you listen to them, they said, he's not doing well. His oxygen levels are down. No one's seen him. No one's heard of him. He's, you know, and they were painting this picture that you know, Gabriel Sherman in the Vanity Fair article is saying, this killed my friends. Is it going to kill me too? And that it sounds like he's on death's door. They're painting this picture, and they're all sort of like feeding off of one another, putting out their leaks. Meanwhile, I happen to actually do have some fairly good sources. Let's just say Bethesda is a former naval institution. I was a Navy officer. You can do the math on that. And so I'm reaching out and I'm saying, hey, what's going on with all this? Is this true? And they said, well, you know, I mean, he's diagnosed and he wants to come in, but no, he's doing well and he's actually recovering. And so there came to be this point in that weekend, and you can call it COVID weekend now, where, right? It's COVID weekend. and there were two things that were going on. There was one side was telling you the President of the United States was about to die. And we need Pence and Pelosi, and does Pence have it? And maybe he should be thrown out. But if you turn to One American News, and we're saying, no, I mean, he's doing well, and he feels fine. In fact, the one was that their main concern is that he wouldn't rest, and they said he would lie down for 20 minutes, and then he would start pacing around the room. He'd lie down again, and they say, Mr. President, you need to rest. And he said, I can't, I gotta get out there, start making phone calls and everything else. And then as it started seeping out, and Rudy Giuliani called him, and then he started making phone calls, and he started doing videos, and he started doing pictures, and people realized that those sources were full of crap that were coming out. They were just full of crap, and that we were the ones who were actually telling the truth. And the other piece of it was that I'm fairly certain of this, that One American News was the only media outlet that was even asking the question about how the First Lady was doing, because she was diagnosed as well. The fact that they wouldn't even ask a question at the press briefings, it's disgraceful. It's completely disgraceful. Completely disgraceful. I'm happy to say that we were able to do so, and she's doing just fine.
Is he alive? Joseph Mifsud, tell us about Joseph.
Oh my goodness. So my wife, who's here somewhere, I don't know where she is, she's the one who actually alerted me back years ago that this person was never a Russian operative, but he was actually well connected to European socialist circles at the highest levels you could possibly imagine. And the way I met this person, if you actually followed the media, you would think that Putin introduced me to him. This was some sort of guy who was then pulling me to the side, telling me that this is how we're going to collude, we're going to hack emails, we're going to help you, and Russia's going to make sure that Trump is their stooge. That's how the media portrayed this person, just at a very superficial level. But there was nothing further from the truth. This person was introduced to me by a high-level Italian diplomat who was actually the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy. And this all happened actually before my name was even released to the Washington Post as part of the Trump campaign. So you could understand how bizarre this situation would be. I'm not a public person yet, but the Italian foreign minister decides that he's going to introduce me to this person who's then going to help me on the Trump campaign. And this all happened in March of 2016. Now, Mifsud then begins to introduce me to these various fake people, like the niece of Vladimir Putin. I'm sure you've heard of this one. That is this person named Olga Polonskaya that we later found out was actually some sort of trainee at this spy school that Mifsud was working for in Rome. Now, shortly after this person tells me that the Russians have dirt on Hillary, which, by the way, if you actually look back at that time, this was widely speculated stuff. This wasn't a secret. So he tells me this information over lunch in London. And the reason, even more important than Mifsud, is what was going on the week before Mifsud told me that information, and the 2 weeks after Mifsud tells me this information. And that's something that I want everybody to understand what was going on in London, because I think it's very pertinent to declassification now. And that's that the Australian government decided that they wanted to make me a very important player for them. They decided to meet with me the week before Mifsud tells me the information, a week after, and then 5 days after that. I don't care if you're Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, foreign governments don't want to see you that often. Okay? Especially in April and May of 2016, when Trump, I don't even know if he was the nominee at that point. They're telling me essentially that you're making a mistake working for this guy, he's a pariah. This is the Australian government. This is a pariah, I'll never forget that word. He's horrible for what we want to do with global trade agreements, with TPP. If you remember what TPP was, it was this globalist trade agenda that would have destroyed US industry and obviously helped Southeastern Asian countries, China, Japan, and Australia. The same thing with Brexit. the UK ministers, UK government officials that all started to circle me around that exact moment when Mifsud tells me this rumor, Trump is horrible. We don't want Brexit. This guy's a threat to our long-standing principles of shared cooperation with the United States, and he's also a menace, and we don't support what he's talking about regarding Brexit or Russia. So right away, you have Mifsud, the UK, Australia, all circling me within a matter of 10 to 12 days in London. Sure.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
real quick? Did nothing in you, like, did you go back to the campaign and say something weird's going on? Did you flag anyone, or?
Well, this is why that's a great question. I wasn't talking with Hamas, Iran, another, like, you know, some terrorist
The
group.
Obamas were.
Well, yeah, they were. I was talking to ostensibly U.S. allies that every person associated with the presidential campaign as a foreign policy advisor should be talking to. Okay? So there was nothing that would alert me, just like I mentioned, Joseph Mifsud. He wasn't introduced to me by the SVR or the KGB. He was introduced to me by the Italian foreign minister. So nothing raised my suspicions about these people. Only afterwards did we learn that the Italian foreign minister was connected to Italian intelligence. Did we learn that people like Alexander Downer were connected to the Clinton Foundation, MI6. Only after did I find out that the DIA that reached out to me very shortly after Mifsud tells me this information, we're not supposed to be talking to American citizens abroad. You have to understand, this was all happening within 10 days. So you can understand how confusing and confounding a situation would be, where all of a sudden you have all of these people wanting to talk with you and entrap you and pull information out and try and tie you up, considering that these are U.S. allies. So your suspicions aren't up. So Mifsud, then we know the rest of the story, has gone underground. This is a person who lived and breathed foreign conferences. He made his money attending conferences, including with the Secretary of Defense under Obama, Ash Carter in Riyadh, after I told the FBI what he told me, and he's gone underground now. So the last thing I'll leave about him is, I'll just mention that there's a reason that A.G. Barr and Durham have traveled to Rome and London over the last year to learn about this guy, because he is at the center of the entire conspiracy. And once we learn exactly who was handling this person, if and when A.G. Barr actually has the gall, if you will, to release it, it's going to probably change history in this country and might actually upend how the U.S. cooperates with these foreign governments, and will hopefully usher in Trump getting reelected, because there's nothing more that we as Americans safeguard in our institutions of democracy, the rule of law, and the democratic process, and no one should ever be interfering in that. And that's why I think this information has to come out before the election, and if not, it might be the missed opportunity of the century.
Yeah, so let's move into more of that now. We've had a Durham investigation going on since now we've found out at least 2017, April 2017, where Peter Strzok has said that he was trying to postpone his meeting with Durham, who was probably at that point investigating leaks that were coming out of the FBI. So this is not a stranger to what's been happening. David, what are your thoughts on where we are? Is Durham doing anything? What is he doing? Is he just sitting there?
I don't have any special information about any of that. I wish I did, but I've always been a little bit skeptical that we will have justice, that we will have, I mean, maybe we'll have the complete story, as George said. I hope we do, at the very least, just to figure out what happened. But, I mean, we live in two countries right now. Half the country believes that all of us are a bunch of conspiracy theory believing, Russia-friendly, you know, white nationalist maniacs. And we don't think very much of the other guys either. They were able to convince half the country of this complete insanity. They were able to, I mean, you all remember what it was like in, what, February, March, April of 2017. It was every day, boom, 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 24/7. And I remember when Mark Levin said,
Yep.
did his show, which sort of, kicked off a lot of the awareness here and got a lot of people to start pulling strings. The media went nuts because they knew that we were over the target. We didn't even know exactly where over the target we were, but they did because they were doing it. And half the country still believes this stuff. So I think I don't think that fact is lost on people like Barr in particular. I think he's looking at this situation, and I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's in on it. I don't think he's a deep state plant. I think he's looking at it and saying, how is 50% of the country going to take this completely traumatic reveal that they've been wrong? Does that justify not doing anything? I don't think so.
Because there's another 50%
I don't think so.
that...
Right.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. But I'm just saying, I think in general there is, when some of us have looked at the people inside the Trump administration who've worked for the president, and there's a temptation to say, okay, this guy is bad, he must be in on it because he's not doing the things that I want him to do. And I'm sure there's a lot of that. Believe you me, there's a lot of that, and we've seen it. But there's also another option, which is, or more than one other option, which is that there are people who are well-intentioned, but who have no idea what time it is. Which is, they think this is like 2004, 2005, there'll be another election, there'll be another election, the parties will very peacefully transition.
There are still people that think that way?
I think there are. I mean, we see them on Twitter. We call them bad names.
We do.
We see them on Twitter, and and these people aren't necessarily bad, but they're woefully inadequate. And I think that the president needs to be surrounded by people who do know what time it is, who do know what the stakes are, and who are ready to fight, understanding very well that you are never going to win over that half of the country that is really another country in everything but name.
So I have the same question for you. What do you think the outcome of all this will be?
Yeah, so I basically kind of want to even take it to a bigger level in a sense, because you mentioned about half the country believes, a complete lie about George, about his family, and about the president, and about, in a sense, all of us. But there's half of the country that knows the truth, too. And how is it that that information got out? Well, that information got out because of independent media, because of social media, because of networks like One American News, like many other networks out there that are doing this, that are willing to fight back against these false narratives that are being perpetuated, in many cases by corporate media, in many cases by legacy media. And that is the reason that they want to shut all of it down. Because there are very powerful people in this country who enjoyed a complete control over, I guess you could say, the narrative. Right? There was one narrative, a mono-narrative. They've talked about this. You can look at conferences where they're talking about this, the mono-narrative. And that now that they've lost that monopoly because of social media, because of the rise of independent media, because there has been the democratization of information. Twitter, just before we got on stage today, Twitter just announced that they're not going to let you retweet something as many times as you used to be able to. They said they're going to limit retweets on tweets that they decide are misleading, or they decide are not credible tweets, right? Who decides that? Why is it to Twitter to decide that, right? There's a reason all of this is happening. There's a reason that when General Flynn finally gets Sidney Powell in there, and someone that I was the only person who would interview Sidney Powell when this thing first started. Nobody else wanted to have her on, right? Even before she became Flynn's lawyer. And she got all of the documents declassified. She got them all released on Flynn's case, and we learned so much about this. that the DOJ finally admitted, they said, look, we don't have a case here, we want to withdraw. But the justice system won't even let them drop the charges, even when they've asked to drop the charges. And that's why when David says we need to understand what point of the movie we're in, we really need to understand that. Because we're talking about using the justice system to set things right when they're still completely tilted out of whack from where they should be. And I've sat in the courtroom with Roger Stone, with General Flynn, with George here, with Paul Manafort. I've been to all of these trials. I've covered them, sitting on those very uncomfortable benches. These are nice chairs. Those benches are terrible. Don't do that if you don't have to. But I've just seen this, and I've seen the judges up there and the prosecutors from the special counsel's team, and they act like it's completely normal to be prosecuting them. But then all of a sudden, the very last hearing, actually, this is really interesting. Tracy, I know you were live tweeting it, but did you notice how when they have a new, I guess, Department of Justice attorney who's representing the government in the Flynn case, and he wasn't these Aaron Zelinsky types from before, from the special counsel's team. So this guy comes up, and remember, for years now, almost 3 years, every time you hear General Flynn, and it's the charges, and the collusion, and everything, all these terrible things that he's done, well then this guy comes in, and he's not part of the special counsel's team, and he goes, oh, you know what, actually we looked into it, and it turns out there wasn't a case after all. We're very sorry. Turns out that he didn't have any evidence, usually something that's kind of important when you go into one of these charges. And it was like, addicts will, people who have addictions will talk about a moment of clarity. They'll say it's just a moment of clarity where they can see life as it is, and that's what it felt like. Because here's somebody who is sitting on the side of the table that's been persecuting General Flynn and his family for years, and suddenly flips on a dime and says, oh, we're so sorry, there was no evidence. we really apologize. And I really sat back and I said, my goodness, the amount of money, the amount of effort, the amount of push that it took to get them to admit that they made it all up and they made it was a lie. And folks, that is why I'd like all of you to give yourselves a round of applause right now for being here, for standing up for this country, for standing up for not even, conservative, Republican, just standing up for doing what's right. That's what all of you do. Literally standing.
All right, so we've got about 3 minutes left, so we're going to do like a quick rapid fire thing. Does Trump win in November, yes or no?
Yes.
You?
Yes.
The election won't be decided by the end of November.
How long after do you think it'll be?
We'll see.
How long can they go? They can't go past the 16th of December, so.
We'll see.
Oh.
How long will Antifa be able to fill the streets?
Yeah, that's right.
They're not going to be around for much longer if they keep. People are getting angry. I'm going to curse. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us for this panel today.
Well, that concludes this live stream. It's kind of a big crowd here. You can see a lot of engagement here. People love this.
Okay, so what did you guys think about that?